What's happening, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going over my Sony A7R4s, giving you my full review. I've shot 4 weddings with these now, and I've done a little bit of video with them. I've really put them through its paces, had them set up just like I like it. And I'm going to give you my thoughts versus my A7R3s, which I originally said I wasn't going to upgrade to the R4s. You know, it's not a massive upgrade, but if you're a working professional, I think you're going to see the benefits of the R4. Before we start, you guys know I don't script any of these videos, so if I need to correct anything, I've made a mistake, check in the description for any updates or any corrections, maybe in the pinned comments or in the description. And yeah, thanks everybody for pointing things out when I get it wrong. At the end of this video, I am going to talk about if you should upgrade, maybe different situations where you should upgrade and where you shouldn't. A lot of people, the answer is going to be if you have the R3, you probably shouldn't bother upgrading to the R4. But you know, I'm realistic, so I want to talk about that, and I'm going to touch on exactly at the end who should upgrade and who shouldn't. So through this review, I'm going to show you a whole bunch of photos that I took at these weddings. They're all just edited with my preset pack. Link is in the description if you want to support the channel. So every photo I'm going to put up, I'm going to put the EXIF information so you can see what lens I was using and the settings that I was using as well. So let's get straight into it, talking about handling. Now the R4 is much nicer to hold in my hands. It is a little bit of a personal preference, but I think we can all kind of agree the R3s were a step up over the R2s for sure, but still not quite there in terms of ergonomics when you're comparing them to like a Canon EOS R5 or the Nikon Z series. These R4s are much better, and honestly these are the first Sony cameras where I haven't felt like I needed a grip. They are still a little bit short, but you guys know I have large hands. It seems to be a thing I talk about on this channel. So my finger does slip off the bottom, but I have some grips on the way anyway. I'm going to do a review on those, see what they're like, and see if you even need them. But I have a feeling most people aren't going to need a grip for these. I certainly haven't missed it that much. So the ergonomics are much better. The buttons feel much better. They're much more clicky. They're not as spongy as the A7R Mark IIIs and A7 III. Same with the dials. They just feel nicer, and the shutter button also. So you know, there is upgrades in terms of usability as well. So the Viewfinder was another massive upgrade going over the R3 to the R4, and especially the A7 Mark III. It's much better, much higher resolution. You can set it to high FPS in the menu system, so that gives you a kind of smoother, less motion blur effect. But if you have it left on standard, it's still plenty smooth enough, and the image is sharper in the Viewfinder. So I have it set to standard, and I really like that. It's that good that I don't even really, you guys know I have glasses, but I don't even really need to use them when I'm using my A7R4. I have had a few questions on the Viewfinder about how it compares to the R5 and R6 and the Z series cameras. Honestly, I think they're all pretty much on par now. They all are slightly different, but they're all fantastic. And unless you are having them really, you know, side by side, you're not going to be able to tell really which one's better. I think they're all fantastic. The difference really is where the LCD screen comes in. So the LCD screen on the R4, it feels about the same as the R3. I haven't checked the specs, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same LCD screen. So it's still much better than the A7 III, which is just mind-blowingly frustrating to look at. One thing with the A7 III, if you're switching to Sony or something and you haven't experienced it, the A7 III screen is just really terrible. It looks like everything is blowing out when it's not, and it has a really weird pinkish kind of red hue to it in the highlights especially. So it kind of does the job where you can see the composition that you're going for, but it's really not accurate. So the R4 LCD screen is fine. I don't have any real complaints, like it's accurate, it's sharp enough, but the R5 and Z series cameras are definitely better. Their rear screens are much better. So that's one thing I'm really hoping Sony improve on from now on, like the A7 Mark IV. They didn't seem to upgrade it with the A7S III, which is a little bit disappointing, especially on a camera that's so heavily focused on video. But I'm really hoping with the A7 IV and future updates that they fix the LCD screen and put something really impressive in it. I don't think people would mind paying another couple of $100 for something like that. I may be wrong, but you guys let me know in the comments. Would you rather pay another $100 or $200 or whatever to get a really nice LCD screen on the back of your camera or not? The other thing I wanted to touch on with the Viewfinder, I've seen a lot of reviews saying the Sony has more blackout than the Canon EOS R. Now that is true for sure. I've seen videos, and I've tried it out. The R5 and R6 have less blackout when you're on that highest frame rate mode. Now with the Sony, it's a little bit different. So on all of the other modes, like continuous, low, medium, and high, you get that blackout. But if you put it in high plus, if you're a sports shooter, for example, and you want that max frame rate, as soon as you start holding down the shutter button, the blackout disappears and it doesn't have any blackout at all. So I'm not sure why that is, but it's just something to note. Try that out for yourself. Next thing is the memory card slots. So the R4 obviously has huge files, 61 megapixels. I am shooting in compressed RAW, so the files are about 60 megabytes each. So still a pretty large file, but they've upgraded the memory card slots to have UHS 2 in both of them. They've also switched them around the right way, so memory card 1 is on top and memory card 2 is on the bottom, but they're both UHS 2. So I've done some tests. Now I only have 2 UHS 2 cards, which Sony sent me. They're tough ones and they're really fast, really great. But all my other cards are the SanDisk Extreme Pro UHS 1 cards. So I done some tests. The first couple of weddings I shot was UHS 2 on the top and UHS 1 in the bottom. I did notice it was about the same as the A7R III, which has a UHS 2 and a UHS 1 slot. Keep up with me here a little bit. So it's kind of pointless, because if you're shooting RAW to both on the A7R III or A7 III, you're bottlenecked by that second slot. So it's only going to write as fast as that. The buffer's only going to clear as fast as the second UHS 1 card slot. Now, after getting a little bit frustrated, I put both my Sony TUF cards into one of my cameras, which are both UHS 2, and it was a lot faster. So I put UHS 2 card slots in, tested it out on high plus, which is, I think it's like 12 frames a second or something, and bursted off 30 shots. And the buffer cleared just under twice as fast with 2 UHS 2 card slots in there. So it looks like I'm going to be spending a little bit more money on memory cards. Because it does make it faster, especially if you're hybrid shooting. I can take a few photos and it's just going to clear out faster than if I was on the iMac III, so I can press record on the video a little bit quicker. The focus joystick on the back is really nice. It's definitely upgraded. It has the kind of little pin cushion feel to it, and it does move around a little bit quicker. But to be honest, I don't really need it that much with the new real-time tracking system. So obviously with the A7R IV, they've added real-time tracking and upped the performance a little bit in terms of focus itself. Let me tell you straight off the bat, if you're on the A7 III or the R3, a lot of guys saying the A7 III is way better than the R3. Honestly, it's just not the case. I have both of them. I still have an A7 III, which I'm filming on now. And the A7 III and the R3 are so similar in terms of focus performance. There's really not much difference. Other than the A7 III, you can go right to the edges of the frame. With the R3, you kind of lose a little bit of performance right on the sort of far outside edges. Now the R4 definitely is a step up. It's not a huge change, but the biggest difference is the real-time tracking. I'll put a demo up here so you can see it, but all you really do is leave the focus point in the center and hover over what you want to grab, press AF on, or if you don't want to use back button focus, hold the shutter down, and it just kind of just holds whatever you want it to focus on. It's fantastic. So it's literally just going out, grabbing which focus point you want, and then dragging around the frame. It's so good. It's really accurate. It's really fast. And I'm really impressed by it. There was some situations, I shot a really nice Indian wedding on the weekend, and the dance floor was just going nuts. So real-time tracking kind of freaked out a little bit when there was heaps of people dancing around in the frame. So all I did was switch back to expanded flexible spot, and just like I would on my R3, and the focus worked perfectly. So when you've got a really busy scene and people walking in front of the camera and just non-stop, there's like, I don't know, probably 50 people on the dance floor, and they were just going nuts. And it was struggling a little bit to keep up with the real-time tracking. So switch back to expanded flexible spot and your problem solved. In terms of low light focusing, I did find it was slightly better than the R3. Nothing to really write home about. Like I said, definitely better, but not a massive jump up. I found it really great anyway, and I honestly found the R3 pretty good. Honestly, the focus system on the R3, I never really had missed shots anyway. It was very rare that I missed any shots when I was culling, going through a wedding. It was very rare I found a shot that was out of focus anyway. So, how much better can you get than that? The real difference is with the R4 is it's just a little bit more efficient to compose your images with real-time tracking. Now, video focus is just insane. There's really not much to talk about. It just works perfectly all the time. iFocus works flawlessly. Great for vlogging. And obviously you can't see the screen, but you really don't need to. If you're on a real wide lens, like my Tamron 17mm. It just focuses, no worries at all. Not much to talk about. The video focus is basically perfect. Now, battery life was really fantastic. I have 5 batteries all up, so most weddings on my R3s I would get to, you know, I'd use like 1 1/4 battery in one camera, and I wouldn't even use 1 battery in the other one. So every single one of these weddings, all 4 of them, I was doing photo only. I wasn't hybrid shooting for any of these, but I didn't even use 1 battery for each camera, so I never had to switch out the battery for them. That's about, all weddings were about 9 to 11 hours, and I shot between 2,500 to 3,000 images on both cameras combined. So easily getting over 1,500 images with 1 battery, no problem at all. I did have airplane mode on, which does save you a little bit of battery power. But yeah, battery life is really fantastic. Now, heating, the camera never got hot. I never really had issues with my R3s getting hot, but I know people are going to ask about it. It is coming into summer now, and one of the weddings was real hot all day. I got a little bit burnt, and they never got warm or anything like that. So, I don't know, I just thought I would clear that up. Neither of them got hot. Never had a problem with the R3 anyway. Yeah. Let's move on. Now, before we get into image quality, I did want to just quickly touch on, if you watch my live video, I had a few issues with the Sigma 35mm 1.2. Now, the issues were I tried it on each camera, and when I was using the 35 1.2, on one wedding, my camera locked up 3 times, and I had to take the battery out, and the photo I'd just taken when it locked up, it obviously didn't save to the memory card, so that was a little bit of an issue. But once I took the battery out and put it back in, it was fine. The other issue I had was when pressing the shutter button, it did have a noticeable delay. So a really weird issue. Like when I was on my 24mm or my 55 or even the 85 Sigma, I have no issues at all, no lockups, no anything. And I didn't have any issues with that on my A7R Mark III either with the 35 1.2. Now, I found a firmware update online for the Sigma, and I'd done that, and the shutter delay is gone, so that's really, I'm really glad to see that. I haven't been able to shoot it in a real world situation yet to see if it locks up, but I have taken a bunch of photos and it hadn't locked up at all, so hopefully that is fixed, and it's obviously a Sigma issue, not an A7R IV issue. So yeah, hopefully that's fixed. I'll touch on that and update you guys in a later video as well. Now let's get on to image quality. I know a lot of you are excited to talk about image quality and how it compares to the A7R III. So 61 megapixels. That was probably the least favorite thing I was looking forward to with this camera. I'm still really frustrated with Sony. They haven't put like a medium raw in there or something. And I was a little bit concerned with storage and editing performance and all that kind of stuff. Now, you guys know I am using a piece of software called RAWsy, which I have talked about a little bit lately, and I'm not sponsored by them. They haven't paid me. I paid for the software. But I'm using RAWsy to compress my files after I bring them into my computer, and that compresses them a lot with no image quality loss. So in compressed RAW, the Sony's A7R IVs shoot about 60 to 65 megabytes per image. With RAWsy, it brings them all the way down to like 20 to 25 megabytes. I still don't understand how it does it, but I've had them side by side and I can't see any image quality loss at all. So that's what I'm doing. But even without RAWsy, I haven't noticed editing on my MacBook 16-inch. I haven't noticed any loss in performance or anything like that. They edit the same as my R3 files, which I'm really pleased to see. The difference is now I do really have to shoot 128 gig cards on each camera, so it's a little bit expensive. I do have to upgrade those, and I'm going to have to get the UHS 2 ones as well. So it's costing me a little bit of money, but it's going to be worth it in the long run. Where the A7R3s, I could get away with a 64 gig in each card, you know, 2 64s for backup, but I usually would be able to get a whole wedding onto a 64 gig card per camera. But yeah, I am having to use 128 gig cards now, so not a massive deal breaker. I mean, it's a little bit of a pain if I'm totally honest, but it's not a huge issue. Now, I wanted to touch on one thing which I really didn't even think about when I upgraded to the R4s, was the kind of concept that you hear, you know, 8K video being compressed down to 4K or something like that, and you get a much sharper 4K image. Now, I'm finding the same thing with the R4s in terms of photos. So when I export my final JPEGs, I export them at 6000 pixels on the long edge in Lightroom. That just makes them a little bit smaller in size, easier to deliver, easier for my clients to download, and they still print massively without any issues. So 6000 pixels is a real sweet spot in terms of delivering to your clients. Obviously, I still am keeping the RAWs, so if they want like a billboard printed or something with their faces on it, you know, I can give them a full-size image. Now, straight out of the camera, the A7R IV files are almost 10,000 pixels on the long edge, so a really, really big file. Now, obviously, the difference here is when you're looking at the final exported JPEG at 6,000 pixels on the long edge, when you zoom into 100%, you're not zooming into 100% really, you're zooming into about 60%. So everything looks fantastic. It's like, you know, it's like I said, 6K video compressed to 4K. It looks better than a normal 4K video. And the same concept applies when you're talking about photo, and I really didn't expect that. So any noise, any grain, any kind of, I don't know, sharpness issues, maybe if you're using a lesser lens, is going to be hidden a lot if you're compressing those files to 6,000 pixels on the long edge. I know a lot of people are going to say, I see these comments all the time, people saying, oh, you shouldn't have bought the R4 and whatever. Well, you know, that's just not what it's about. This is how I do it. You can do it however you like. Go for gold, have fun. So yeah, the image quality is amazing, and it is handy having that you know, compression ability to deliver some really, really impressive sharp JPEGs on the end. Now, talking about low light and dynamic range, I do feel like the R3 was very slightly better in low light than these R4s. That was to be a little bit expected with the high megapixel count, but they are still really good in low light. So these photos were shot at 12,800 ISO, and you're looking at them at actually 100%. So they are grainy, but it's not a deal breaker. You know, there was no light, I didn't use any flash. The only light was from the overhead fairy lights and a little bit of ambient light coming from the venue behind me. But, you know, really dark, 12,800 ISO. At 100%, you can see a little bit more grain than you would on the R3. But honestly, you know, even these images at 12,800, they still look great, and they're still going to print good. Especially, you know, when you're going back to what I was talking about before, exporting at 6,000 pixels on the long edge, they're going to look even better than the R3 files at 6,000 pixels on the long edge, because you're still not going quite as deep into the file. Now, in terms of dynamic range, I know DxOMark on their sensor scores say the R3 is very slightly better than the R4. In real world situations, I haven't noticed it at all. They seem to be about the same. I haven't been in any situations editing these weddings where I was like, oh, I wish I could just bring the highlights down a little bit more or bring the shadows up. I've been editing them exactly the same, and they both look the same. Both really fantastic. Colors are really neutral. Really good base to start off. So yeah, really happy with dynamic range also. Now, final points I want to touch on is, should you upgrade? Is the R4 something? If you have the R3, should you buy the R4? Maybe on the A7III you want to buy the R4, or you're coming from another system and you want to get into Sony. Bear in mind that I am a full-time wedding photographer. This is my profession. This is what feeds my family. And anything I buy in terms of equipment is tax deductible, and I get benefits in that situation as well. So for me, all these usability features, the better viewfinder, the real-time tracking, the better grip, the better UHS-2 card slots, all those kind of things made it better and definitely made it worth the upgrade for me. You know, I was able to trade in my R3s and save a little bit of money there. So it wasn't like I had to just fork out like 11,000 New Zealand dollars to upgrade to these cameras. Was able to, you know, trade in my cameras, and I feel like it was worth it for me. Definitely 100% don't regret it. Now, if you were like, say, a hobbyist, an enthusiast that was really into photography, you go out and you shoot a lot, and you have the R3s already, it's probably not worth the upgrade, to be honest. Like, you know, it's not going to change anything drastically about your photos, especially if you're not someone using real-time tracking. You know, if you were doing like landscape photography or something, you're really not going to notice that much of a difference. I'd probably just stick to the R3s and see what comes out with like the A7 IV or whatever they bring out next. But the R3 is still fantastic. And unless you had money to burn in your pocket, you know, I wouldn't bother upgrading to the R4s personally. I do think if you're a sports photographer or wildlife, maybe you'd definitely benefit from the real-time tracking. But, you know, I do think the A7 Mark IV will have that. That's pretty much a given. And you also have options like the A7C, which is fantastic for wildlife as well. That does have the real-time tracking. Just depends whether you like that kind of form factor. So, you know, all their crop sensor bodies, the A7RIV has real-time tracking as well. So there's other options as well, but if you want to upgrade to the R4, it does have real-time tracking, so that's something that you may be able to benefit from. Now, finally, if you're coming from another system into Sony, maybe you've tried the Z cameras and you're not feeling them, or you're upgrading from a DSLR to Sony, would you buy the R4? Now, I think the R4 is the best all-round camera that Sony have at the moment. They have a lot, so you've got the A9, the A9 II, A7R III, A7R4, A7C, A7III. There's a whole bunch of cameras that you can choose from. But the R4, I think, in my mind, is the best overall camera. You are paying more for it. If you have the budget for it, I would definitely jump from another system straight into the R4s. You just have to bear in mind all the storage issues and everything. You know, if you're not shooting, a lot of people, unless you're a wedding photographer or maybe sports or something, you're not shooting a whole bunch of images like I am. So storage may not be an issue for you. But yeah, the R4 is a fantastic camera. I definitely recommend it. It's just going to come down to money. Now, I have bagged a little bit on the A7 III, but honestly, the biggest issue I have with that camera is just the rear LCD screen, and that's not going to be a complaint that a lot of people are going to care about. So if you just want lower resolution, but you still want to get amazing focus system and you want to get really nice video, then, you know, this is what I'm filming on now, the A7 III. It does fantastic video. That's going to be a really great option as well. So definitely don't discount that camera. You know, we're not going to see the A7 IV until like late next year, I believe. So if you're wanting to switch now, I think either the A7 III, R3 or R4s are really, you can't go wrong with any of them. The best thing you can do is just check your budget, feel it in your hands, and, you know, consider whether the real-time tracking and extra megapixels is going to be something that you want. You definitely don't need 61 megapixels. It's not going to be a thing. You know, it is nice to have when you're talking about compressing the files like I was. But yeah, any camera is going to be fantastic. Anything out these days, the R5, R6, Z series, these Sony cameras, they all do a really fantastic job. You just have to use them a little bit differently. So thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate you following along. Subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next video in a couple of days.